What's up, everybody? It's been a while since I've done a video, and I wanted to kind of come in with some updates. On deck has been really good and has been a wonderful experience, but progress has slowed down a little bit during the program, and so things have been progressing a little bit more slowly than I want. And this week, I don't really have a whole lot of specific um, kind of very specific feed or new kind of visuals or things to look at. But I do have some new kind of ideas that I want to discuss. And kind of wanted to use this time to kind of review kind of the more of the business side of kind of starting a startup, if you will, or specifically Alloy and what that would take and kind of what that means kind of going in the future, because it's not just the process of building a prototype that's really important. It's also the process of understanding what is the business and how does it make money, how does it grow, how does it kind of compete in the market. All those types of things are really important to understand. um, and so one of the things that we do in when you start a startup and you try to get funding is you write a pitch deck and you put together kind of a one pager. Frequently you'll kind of write out all of the things that you want in your pitch deck, and then you translate that to a deck that people can use. And one of the things that I have always struggled with, and one of the things I've kind of avoided in this process, is really deeply understanding the customer. And it's not even so much that I've wanted to avoid understanding the customer as in the physician, but understanding how a private practice operates. A private practice in the U.S., private practices, private physicians who own their own practices, that's essentially what that means, are decreasing pretty rapidly. In fact, just last week, the American Medical Association released some data that showed that for the first time ever, first time in a long time, fewer than 50% of physicians are in private practice. More than 50, I think it's something like 58 or 59%, or almost 60% maybe, are in a health system or within a hospital setting. They don't work for themselves, they work for someone else. And this is pretty significant because there are a couple of reasons that the American Medical Association listed. But one of the primary ones, I think one of the top three, number two perhaps, was technology and the EHR. Physicians don't want to deal with EHRs. They don't want to deal with upkeep. They don't want to try to manage them. They don't want to try to buy them. They don't want to try to maintain them. Frequently, they're hard to use, and so physicians are just selling their private practices to either a health system or private equity groups, and just essentially collecting a paycheck and seeing patients and letting somebody else deal with the technology, essentially. And there's a couple concerns with this, specifically from the American Medical Association was listing a couple concerns, um, specifically within reducing competition, which increases the cost of care, potentially even lowers the quality of care, and of course, kind of can damage local communities. You have particularly even in rural communities where you may only have one, maybe two doctors' offices in a whole town, and suddenly they're both either bought up by a hospital, or maybe they're even closed for good, and suddenly those communities are without care. They're without access to care, or they're out without access to care that knows them, that knows their community. And this is a big concern for a lot of people, and specifically because you have again, like I said, one of the top three reasons for this is the fact that physicians just don't want to deal with EHRs. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this is that there are some murmurs and kind of whisperings that this is kind of a cyclical nature, that you're kind of having this pendulum swing towards more physicians working in, for a health system or for someone else, and fewer of them in primary care practice, or specifically private practice, not just primary care. And so you have fewer of them actually working in private practice, and perhaps there's kind of this pendulum swing coming where it'll kind of swing back, maybe in 5, maybe in 10 years, maybe 15 years. And in that point, you'll have more physicians who want to open their own practice. And so I see a very specific opportunity here for an EHR that is specifically designed for these practices, that is designed to empower them to do their own marketing, to see patients, to manage human resources, to do all these things, or even integrate other apps and services into it so that all of it just kind of works seamlessly together. And unfortunately, there isn't really a great option right now. There are a lot of options that do cater to primary care. There are a lot of options that cater to private practice, but most of them still don't have a really solid kind of understanding and lead inside that market. And even yes, you can sit here and say like, yeah, okay, it's a small market, but I think a lot of great startups even start within small markets. I think even within less than 40% of these physicians, that's still a significant chunk of the population in the United States. That's still a significant chunk of the market, and there's still a significant amount of room to grow inside of that, and then to expand even beyond that. So, over the last couple of weeks, all of this information has begun to be more clear to me. And thankfully, now that I've kind of had some time to process it, I can see a much clearer value proposition within that. Where if we have, Healthcare OS that comes along and says, "Hey, we actually provide exactly what these physicians need for this market to not only stop shrinking, but to potentially thrive and prosper." I think there's a really great opportunity within that. There's a really great value proposition, not just from the technology and the software side, but from a kind of this overall impact on the industry side. Um, so that's what I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I've kind of met with some different people. We've done some different kind of uh, sessions within On Deck that have really kind of created and brought a lot of that data into perspective for me. On the build side, on the prototype side, I wanted to show you a little bit of something I've been working on, and that is this guy right here. This is a Airtable base. If you ever do anything that has spreadsheets and data management and kind of data processing involved, I would highly recommend you look into Airtable. It's a great little tool. I've used it for all sorts of things, from planning content and data management to analyzing and breaking down heavy amounts of data from like surveys and things, basically making it into a database. And so what I'm doing is, with the help of a physician who's part of On Deck, is we are kind of beginning to build out not just kind of our patient profiles within the prototype, but also building out, you can see like an allergy list, a medication list, problem list, appointments. So like sample appointments, both past and future, that a physician would want to use with different chief complaints. They're building out different, basically all the different encounters that we might need, things like that, for the very specific kind of issues that patients may come in with, to kind of fill our prototype. The reason that this is really good is there's two main reasons that I've done it this way. Is that Airtable has a public API that anybody can use, but specifically the owner of the table can use, and I can use this to hook into our View app. And there's actually a lot of tutorials on how to do that, so that's pretty easy. And now we have a centralized place to deal with all this data. And the reason that's really good is that healthcare data in particular is a very complex thing. In fact, the main data standard called FHIR, FHIR, is an extremely complex kind of data management system, or I guess really it's an opinionated way of writing data management for an application, either in JSON or XML. And one patient file can be anywhere from like 30,000 to up to 70 or 80,000 lines of code. And that's a lot of data to process, and that's a lot of data to try to kind of force into our one little prototype, which is really just meaning to kind of prove an idea. And so I've created this Airtable database that follows a lot of the same naming and structure conventions that FHIR does, just a little bit simpler and a little bit with a little less kind of complexity involved, so that we can use this data, update it easily, and continue to iterate with it inside the prototype. Because that's really the thing, is when you build any kind of app, when you design any kind of app or website, you want to be designing with all of the various use cases in mind. One of the things that I think I talked about this in my last video is, in the Figma file, we had, in the original kind of comps, we had like a patient with two problems in their problem list. And it's like, okay, that's fine. You'll probably have a significant number of patients who have two problems. But you'll probably have even more patients, or maybe just as many, who have 10, maybe 12 problems. Same with the medication list. And they may only have two or three meds. I'm only on two or three prescriptions. But then you might have someone who's older or who has a chronic, several different chronic conditions, and they may be on 8 or 9 different medications. So how do you display that data? And so the data display and the data management within this app is very important because it helps us understand where are the limits, where does this work, where does this not work, how does this break, and how does it continue to evolve over time. If we have just two problems in the problem list, well, what happens if we have 3 or 4? Do we suddenly break the list and say, see all problems? Well, then which two do you prioritize to keep the design clean? Do you display them all and potentially have this really long list of items that someone then has to look through and scan, and it can be kind of hard? There's a lot of challenges with that. I think I can show you an example right here. Yeah, so with this active conditions, like there's only 2 here, and this looks great the way it is. But do we put a button here that says see all, and then it opens in a new card, and but then which 2 do you prioritize? If you display them all, then you kind of have a lot of these little things you have to scan through in this big list. And that's maybe getting into a place where maybe it's a little hard to use or a little hard to understand. And so this is kind of the crux and the reason that I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks really diving into data, really diving into hope in trying to create fake patient profiles and kind of come up with all this information, not just as I said in one of my last videos, not just to have accurate information inside the prototype, but to have information that represents the real world so that we make sure we design a system that works for it. Again, I'm not a physician. I'm not an expert in this. So whether or not it needs to say primary hypertension or something else doesn't really matter to me. What matters is how many active conditions and how is the best way to display them so that we can create a system that can be reusable, that we can plug anything. Because honestly, whether or not we call it primary hypertension or just hypertension doesn't really matter. What matters is how does any active condition or problem in a problem list fit into that block and fit into that space. So that's where I'm at for this week. Sorry, that's a different project, but that's what I'm at for this week. I like I said, kind of slowing down a little bit with On Deck. I'm gonna hope to write something up in the next several weeks, maybe several months from now, about my On Deck experience. It's been really fantastic to be a part of. But I'm very excited about continuing to move forward. Very excited about the possibility that this Airtable kind of system will help to kind of streamline some of this data and specifically help to create better designed experience, and of course very thankful for everyone who has been helping along the way and lending feedback. Everybody who's been a part of On Deck, the several clinicians I've been working with outside of On Deck who have been really thankful, really just gracious with their time and very generous with their time. It's all very appreciated, and I'm hoping that we can continue to push forward and create something that really does work. And hopefully with this additional clarity into the market and into kind of where physicians who are owning private practices, where their needs are and where their problems are, we can create something that really comes in and hopefully, ideally, is a successful system within the market. So thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next video, whenever that is. I'm not sure when it will be. But until then, you can get up with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. I'm always happy to hear feedback, always happy to hear ideas on this. If you want to share, you can find me anywhere there. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.